all take a seat, please? Thanks. Brilliant. So next up, we have sound effects recording, inspiring your sound design workflow, with the brilliant Byron Bullock and Robert Krekel from Formosa Interactive.
Hello, everyone. Great to see so many faces here. It's great. I'm Byron Bullock. Thanks, Adele. I'm creative director at Formosa Interactive UK. I'm also a core member of Boom Library. There's about 4 of us of the main sound designers. Another one in this room, actually. I have about 15 years game audio experience. Before that, I worked as a location sound recordist for TV, so swinging booms around and stuff like that. So I've been around microphones and recording equipment for most of my working life. And this is my partner in crime.
I'm Rob Krekel. I've been doing this thing for about 17 years all told. I'm kind of Byron's counterpart in the US. I'm creative director, head of sound in North America. 11 of the last 17 years, I was at Naughty Dog. Worked on everything from Uncharted 3 all the way through Last of Us Part 2. Worked at every level from sound designer all the way up to audio director, and really excited to share with you all today about some of our recording techniques.
Yes, so we're here to talk about recording. And I wanted to start with a question. Why do we record? I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of answers in this audience, but for me personally, it's all about the inspiration that comes from it. The inspiration I get from making something from nothing, from capturing something from nothing, which is really important. It's a really important part of being a sound designer for me, 100% sure. Everything starts with that little bit of inspiration, finding sounds, techniques, ideas. Recording really just is a big part of the job for me.
Yeah, and it's also incredibly important for your personal development as a sound designer. Every sound designer should have the skills and the abilities to do recording. The more you do it, like any skill, the better you get. And it's also incredibly important for teams. It's morale boosting, it's memory making. Some of my favorite memories from working on games at Naughty Dog are going out and recording, or in the office late at night, solving a problem by recording some props right at my desk. But really, the thing that we're here to talk about mostly
is it's really just all about the eternal search for source material. It's yeah, I mean, it's not the stuff you put on your chips. It's the sort of original content, the great stuff that you want to get, the gold dusty ingredients that we're always looking for. That could be original recordings, synth stuff, heavy processed material, all sorts of stuff. But I do go on about source material quite a lot. So I apologize in advance for that. But every project for me really starts with source material. You know, every character, spell, scene, it always starts the beginning with the source material. I spend my life looking for it and then just figuring out different ways of capturing it.
And when you're on that journey, you're creating a source library forever, a personal library that you can dip back into. You're creating sound memories in your mind that forever will be there, more than any library you'll purchase off the internet. It's an investment both in your personal future, but also a project future, a team's future, and really your personal future as a sound designer. It's like any other skill, like I said before, you got to practice. You got to do it a lot, and you'll get good.
Had to put in there. It's all about having fun, right? I mean, if someone had told me at university that like there's a job out there where you could blow stuff up and record sounds and do that, I would have just laughed at them. But it really is a thing, and it's one of the best parts for me about being a sound designer, for sure. And I don't mind admitting it, because at the start, our sound recordings were pretty questionable, like for sure. But over time and experience, things that have definitely got better, and we'd like to think we're pretty good at it now. So, which is why we wanted to be here to talk to you about the process. There is a little disclaimer. There's no right or wrong way to record, right? Really, I wouldn't put a microphone in water unless it's a hydrophone. That would probably be the wrong way of recording. But this isn't the recording gospel. It's merely our opinions and our experience over time doing it, really. And this might be the last meme, maybe. So we wanted to start with the recording mantra. So for us, there's 3 processes and stages that we go through when we're recording. There really is more to recording than microphones and gear. Like, I get the question all the time that people say, how did you make that sound? What microphones are you using, or what recorder are you using? And most of the time, there's the creative stuff happens before all that. So it's about the what. What are we recording? Where are we recording it? And how are we going about recording it? And we're going to go through the process of that over the next 30 minutes. So the what. So concept. Everything starts with the concept, right? It's the most important stage. People would call this pre-production almost. And it can be a small thing, like it can be a game character, an ability, a weapon, a whole boom library. But everything starts with a concept.
The scale of that concept can really dictate your approach on recording. Sometimes a large-scale recording session or event is needed, but that means you need time and you need money. Oftentimes, if you want to get original sound in your game, a simple guerrilla-style recording will suffice, and allows for far less time and little to no budget. So as an example of one of those small concepts, Uncharted 4, throughout the game, we sort of had this toy gun. It was just a copy of the regular pistol. We didn't really know what toy gun meant. I was responsible for designing the weapons, and so I kind of left it on the low end of the priority list. And then maybe a month before the end of the game shipping, this pops in the game, this toy gun, purple, blue, shooting ping pong balls. And I go, well, no budget to record, kind of too late to go to the Foley stage. So what can I do? I send an email out to the team real quick. Who's got Nerf guns? Get a pile of Nerf guns in my office. I happen to have a ping pong ball in my office from my days at EA Chicago when we used to play a little ping pong. And I very quickly put up a mic, and in about 45 minutes recorded a ton of source. And we'll take a listen to some of those raw recordings. First one is a Nerf gun shot. The next one is a cork pop gun, little toy pop gun. Sort of a classic sound. Next is a different Nerf gun, mechanisms, movement, manipulation. And then last is a ping pong ball, which I'm sure you all know what it sounds like, but we'll listen anyway. And now we're going to take a listen to the clip in the game, and you'll see kind of how that all translated.
Yeah. Here they come. Take cover. I'm surrounded. Bullseye. Take that. And that.
As you can see, the recordings pretty much went straight into the game as they were.
Like you need.
It was super quick to gather those props. An email, and then minutes later had a whole mess of guns to record. It was super fast to record them. I did it in my office. I didn't need to find a special place or a stage, just in my office at my desk. It was also super fast to implement them because I edited them right away. It was recording straight into Pro Tools, edit in the same session, out to implementation, and out into the game. And really, it was the appropriate amount of time for something that is in the game for 5 minutes. But it was custom and bespoke and perfectly appropriate for the thing I was trying to make.
Still on the what, but moving on to research. It's a big part of what we do, trying to research different things. It's one of the most critical parts, and it's quite time consuming. So like when I say research, it's thinking about what affects the sounds. For example, different bullets and different explosives have a different sound. An oil fire sounds different to a burning wood fire. How do we get a wolf to howl and stuff like that? So this is a big part of what we do. And these are all questions that we try to answer before we get to the recording session, because you don't want to be turning up there and trying to get trying to get the sounds instead of recording. Here's a great example. Our friend the camel over there. Before we got to this session, we spoke to the handlers and specifically asked them how do we get them to vocalize, because we didn't want to just stand there and just have nothing for hours. And they did come up with an idea. They said that normally if we take one of them away from the herd, they start to vocalize. So as soon as we turned up, we got there, they did that, and straight away got stuff straight down the microphone, as if it's like a VO session almost. Which is kind of cool. And we did actually go back there about 4 times because the content was so good, and they sound different every time because they've got different personalities. They all sound different. But that's like gold dust to us, getting that stuff for sure. It goes on for a while.
So another example of this is on Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. We needed Indian elephants. Not a terrible amount of libraries for that stuff. We didn't have any expertise in that, so we sought out those experts. We went to Brian Watkins, John Fasal, who had connections with Animal Sanctuary, with experts who knew how to get these guys to vocalize. And amazingly, the way to get these elephants to vocalize was to be very sweet to them, to whisper sweet nothings in their ears, scratch their eyes in their ears, and we got some amazing weird sounds. So I kind of see the handler in the turquoise shirt just kind of scratching gently.
Doesn't even sound like an elephant. That's crazy, weird.
So another thing that we want to talk about is sourcing of props. So for small concepts, this is actually my prop box. You'll recognize a lot of things in here, some pipe bombs, a toy bow and arrow, a squirt gun. These are all from Naughty Dog games that I purchased very cheaply most of the time, but they were what we needed to record, and a Foley stage doesn't necessarily have them. So a thing I want to point out is when you're going to record, use what you've got around you, right? Like a lot of this stuff I already had in my house. I have 2 kids, so some of these things are theirs. If you do have to spend money, spend it smartly. Don't go out and buy a bunch of expensive stuff. Thrift stores, boot sales, eBay, reclaimed or donated objects from companies that you may know. But build a collection, keep it forever, because you never know when you might need to pull something out and do a custom recording of a prop that maybe you've used before. Lastly, beg, borrow, rent. You may have people that you know who have a junk garage. We had Neil Yucatel, who's now the audio director at Naughty Dog, and he was our, yeah, I've got one of those guy. So it's like, oh, we need a gas mask. He's like, I think I got one of those. We need to record a power washer. I've got 2 of those. So find yourself at that, I got one of those person, and be friends with them, and borrow those things when you can. And then also, if you need to construct some things, which we'll talk about a little later, don't be afraid to rent tools from a store rather than going and buying expensive stuff. We built a ton of wood destruction props for Uncharted 4, and a lot of that was scrap wood, reclaimed pallets, and then a chop saw that we rented from Home Depot.
Everyone needs a Neil, for sure.
Absolutely.
Sourcing for us is a big part of the job. It's like, do you need professionals? Do you need somewhere specific to go? Do you need to do a recce, which is a definite yes, because you don't want a building site or a motorway next to your recording session. But like a great example here is the Steam factory up on the right there. We had to go and record some IRs for a big spaceship hangar. And the main job there was to find the location. We had to scout different places and look for stuff that sounded cool. Turning up with a PA system and recording the IR was the easy bit. It's like the time-consuming part was sourcing that stuff. Construction. Yeah, we just started to talk on construction. It's one of the best parts for us, making stuff. Like, we often have to construct things to get the sound we're after. It's the fun part, right? There's a daxophone there, which our sound designer Jack made. There's a winch system we had to construct to do some wood destruction sounds. And then the more simple stuff, just like chimes and stuff for magic.
And your constructions don't need to be complicated or take a ton of time. So this is a rain rig that I recreated when we were working on Last of Us and Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. We needed a ton of rain drips. And as some of you may know, it doesn't rain that often in LA. So getting the real stuff, kind of difficult. Also really hard to separate from the noise of everything else that's going on. So simple solution. Right above, you'll see a colander full of paper towels filled with water. I could perform it by pressing my hand down for more or less. I could change out the prop that it was dripping on very, very quickly. Again, that's a cookie sheet from my kitchen, not something complicated or expensive. But we were able to control it and get exactly what we needed for a lot of detail in our environments.
Means you can change up the material every time as well, which is great. Here's an example from some boom library stuff. This is a firework zip line that we made in order to get interesting whoosh sounds for arcane magic. Again, it's all camera sound, but you can see we wanted like controlled whooshes, so we just built a nice big line and just fired them down and had microphones down it. The sound, one of the recorders is a bit too close, to be fair. And experimenting, it's one of my favorite parts. I do so many little sound experiments. Half of them are rubbish, but some of them are really good. And it's like, it's where the best stuff comes from for me. And it's sometimes about thinking non-literal and, you know, Foley artists have been doing this for years, but as soon as you can sort of tune your brain into disassociating a prop and the sound that it makes with you know, the bigger your possibilities become. Just because you need to record swords or you need the sword sound doesn't necessarily mean you need to actually record swords, because 99% of the time they don't sound very good from experience. Here's an example of one of my many sound experiments. This is a light to sound diode. Basically, it takes light waves, turns it into sound waves. Then we plugged it into the Eurorack and just processed it live and performed. Random plasma sounds. So I just don't know how I would have made that without experimenting and doing random stuff. So it's one of the fun parts for sure.
Yeah, and experimentation can mean more than just that. When you're working on a game and you have a system that you're responsible for as a sound designer, oftentimes you have to experiment with sounds to fit that system. On The Last of Us Part 2, Mike Marchesotto was the designer who was responsible for our melee system, and he recorded all of this stuff and more various times throughout production as animations changed, as motion matching became more mature. He needed to be able to go back and record over and over again. And that wouldn't really be possible, rapidly iterating a system, having to wait for a Foley stage, go make a schedule, get there, get the sessions back. You're talking days, weeks. This was minutes, sometimes hours, and no additional cost. And again, everything you see here pretty much came from Neil. So get yourself a Neil.
Don't trust anyone with that many axes. Definitely not. Another big part of pre-production, shot lists. It's great for the larger sessions, for sure. This is one from Cinematic Strikes we did, which is just a load of really big percussion. But it's a way of keeping yourself organized. And it's like your script for the day. It's a way of making sure you're going to get what you came for. So this one just has all the different types of drums that we were recording, what we were using to hit them with, how we were performing them. Great way just to keep you on track as long as you stick to it, which I'm very guilty of not sticking to. Safety, definitely one to be thinking about and taking it seriously. Get insurance for sure. Like this poor windshield from 2018 fell into an oil fire, all the mics gone. Riker actually sent us that to test before the windshield came out and it went up in smoke. But luckily we had insurance, so new mics came, which is great. And risk assessments, there's a picture of a risk assessment there, which is essentially just a document that allows you to stay safe and you and the other people you're with. So it just assesses all the risks that are on the session and how you're going to go about to mitigate them, which is important. Moving on to the where.
So I want to talk a little bit about guerrilla style stuff again. It's really important to point out, I always have my recorder with me. This is my M10. It's literally always in my bag or in my pocket. I'm always ready to record. I've recorded 3 things while I've been here at Develop: a loo door latch, some things in my hotel room, and most of the doors in the places we've stayed. It's impromptu recordings are like kind of a great source for like little happy accidents to happen. But you have to get used to the idea of recording in non-ideal spaces. It's going to be noisy. You're not going to be able to control every element, but getting that interesting door latch or gate or sliding door that you're going to use immediately in a project is worth that struggle. It's saved me so many times throughout the course of my career, and I really can't recommend it more. You can do what you can to try to reduce noise and reflections, but really we have pretty amazing tools these days with RX, and I guess with AI denoising waves soon. So don't let noisy environments scare you from getting interesting sounds. Just be out there recording all the time.
For us, the location, having a good location is part of the battle for sure, especially here in the UK. Like Rob said, like there's the obvious one where we're looking for quieter places. But the more important thing and the interesting thing is the location can be the main character of the sound, especially on larger, bigger sounds like gunshots and explosions and stuff like that. Here's a great example. These are World War I firearm recordings we're going to hear. You're going to hear the completely different guns, and each gunshot is the same microphone in the same location, but each gun is different, so it's a different caliber. And tell me what you... So does anyone pick up on the obvious there? They all sound very same, right? They all sound like they could be the same gun, just a different shot. But really, they're different weapons and different calibers. So it just shows you the most important thing there is the location. That's like the main character of the sound. Mic placement is obviously important. We'll talk about that in a minute, but location is a big one. So moving on to the how. So this is the fun part, right? We've broken it down into performance. So how are we making the sound? And then also how are we capturing it?
No, not you.
That's
Sorry.
me. So performance, there's many different ways that you can perform a prop to get different sounds out of it. And there's loads of different ways. You can use different activators, which we'll talk about in a minute, resonators, dampening, there's all sorts of things. But the most important thing is to experiment and not to be afraid of making stuff that actually doesn't sound great, because you're learning, and failing is actually part of learning.
Yeah, the first one we'll talk about, what is an activator? An activator is just an item that you use to interact with your prop. The most basic being hitting and scraping. That's the one I'm most familiar with. It's kind of the cave person approach. But oftentimes that can be enough, but Byron's going to have some examples of some far more interesting ways to interact with props.
Bowing. Every sound designer needs to have a bow. It's like, I think I have about 4 or 5 of them. It's one of the best things ever, especially for creature source material or horror or all sorts of stuff, really. I've got a few examples. So first, we're going to hear the original recording. It's recorded with a 100K mic, and then we'll hear a processed version, which is just slowed down, and then some bigganizing is done, which is a phrase I got from Charles, a good friend of mine, Charles Dean. It's just a way of making it louder, but removing noise and just keeping the character of the sound. So the first one we'll listen to is a plastic cup. Just like instant creature source material. This one's a plastic plate. It's got like a crazy vocal sound to it. And a pine cone, tiny, tiny little sound. Creature source material straight away. And there's a daxophone. This is the daxophone that Jack made. That's your dinosaur dying, falling over. There's all sorts of other things you can do, right? So there's also vibrating and rubbing. So that's the classic thing with a mallet, where you get the sort of whale sounds that you get in the start of Alien, for example. But there's other things you can do. You can... this is a great example for vibrating. We used a butt kicker, which is a haptic device that they use in sim racing. We attached it to the chair that you can see here. And then we just put loads of metal on top of it, and then we just fired Eurorack oscillators through it. and just got interesting vibrating sounds. Again, this works with like LFEs as well. I've seen people been doing that with an LFE, which is great. Again, another weird experiment that went right.
Yeah. Hopefully some exposure to all these different activators and ways of activating your sounds spark some ideas, because the whole point of this is experimentation. Combine some of these ideas. Be playful when you're recording, when you have the time. Try stuff, and really importantly, have fun. Like, this is the fun part of the job. So go around, mess around, and as my favorite American artist was very profound in saying, remember, we don't make mistakes, we just have happy accidents.
Resonators is an interesting one to talk about. This is like a technique that Foley artists have been doing for a long time. It's essentially a way of taking the resonance of one sound and applying it onto another. So it's a similar thing that an acoustic guitar is doing. It's the body of the guitar is just amplifying the sound. So what we essentially do is you take a prop, you put it onto something that has a resonance quality, like a cardboard box, metal box, wooden box, something like that, and then you just perform the sound onto it. And the idea is to try and make the sound have more body and more depth and make it sound a bit bigger, because everything we record always sounds so small when you get it back into the studio. Here's some great examples. This is a Nerf gun, first recorded just in your hand with no resonator. More Nerf guns. And now on a cardboard box. Just instantly got more weight to it. And now this is a winch, you can see in the picture, recorded on a metal box. There's a contact mic used in this as well. But first in your hand. It sounds so small, but it's so big and heavy. And next on a resonator on the box. Now pitch down, it's a drawbridge or something, right? Yeah, so we got all this way without talking about microphones, which just shows you how sort of creative and important the other parts of the recording process really are. But let's talk a little bit about some gear.
Yeah, so when you're starting off, it's important to remember, like, the most fancy, most expensive microphones really aren't important to have. What's important is to start building your skills. H4n is an amazing starting point. It's very affordable. It has XLR inputs. The other ones here, these are kind of my journey. I started with a D50 and an M10, then eventually a D100, and then a Mix-Pre 6, and then Sound Devices 442 to go in front of that, because occasionally you need some nice analog limiters to run into. But the point is, this was built over 17 years. I didn't start with this. I didn't even get to this very quickly. I used that D50 for maybe 10 years before moving on to anything else. Really, it's important that you build these things along the way. And a similar mantra to what we talked about before with props: beg, borrow, rent. If you have a community, reach out to them. If they have microphones that you like, try them. If you have a studio, maybe convince them to get you something. And in lieu of all that, if you can, rent. There's a lot of great microphones you can rent for about 25 bucks, 25 quid a day, versus, you know, a CO1K, 100K is about 2,500, 3,000 now. So everyone can afford around 25 bucks probably for a couple days of play. So just keep that in mind.
Recorders for us, I just wanted to talk a little bit about it as well. A few things that we look for. There's the 32-bit stuff, which is relatively new. Our main recorder, the Sonosax, which you see on the picture there, the black one, doesn't have any of this. It's just essentially a way of getting infinitely more headroom with your recorder. It means you can just set it and forget it, really, which is pretty great. But the Sonosax doesn't have that at all. And it's a 16-channel recorder. Battery power is an important one for us. We have an external battery source that will run the recorders for like a whole day, which is cool. Number of inputs, obviously great. We have a Sound Devices Mix-Pre 6, which is 8 channels, and that's a 32-bit recorder as well, which is cool. But the Sonosax is a 16-channel. Preamp quality obviously is a big thing for us. The signal to noise ratio and stuff you get, which the Sonosax is great at. And limiters, like Rob was saying, very important for loud sounds.
Moving on to microphones, similar idea to recorders. You got to start small, get what you can afford. A lot of that is going to mean the mic's on board with a handheld recorder. You all are in a better space than we were when we started. LOM kind of is incredible when you can get them, but the value for money is just amazing. But Rode, kind of readily available, rivals some way more expensive mics. You can get those pretty cheaply. But if you're borrowing and renting and big in your studio, you may get exposure to things that you like. For me, that was Sheps. Fell in love with those mics, but I was very fortunate to have friends who had them, and I was able to borrow and play with and learn. And eventually I saved my pennies and I got my own setup. But that's, again, 17 years. This didn't happen overnight. I was recording with my D50 for a very long time.
Microphones for us, right? I mean, we do have quite a lot, and different microphones, placement and distance, and technique and combinations of everything can drastically change the sound that you capture, especially on loud sounds. Here's some examples of some guns we recorded, which is different to the last one we saw. This time, same gun, but different mic setup each time. Action. I love that last one, the DPA, which is actually attached to the gun and can still handle it. It goes on for a while, so I cut it short. There's like 27 different mic setups in that. It goes on for like 3.5 minutes, so I didn't want to bore you all. But it is amazing. It just shows you how different the mic perspectives can really sound, whether you're pointing at the shooter, pointing away from it. Also, there's different limiters going on, there's different preamps, and that all affects the sound as well. But it just shows you different mics and stuff really can affect what you're capturing. I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the stuff we use. This is one of our favorite rigs. This is a Sanken CMS50, which is a MS microphone, which we love a bit of MS recording. I just love the fact that it's nice and narrow, but you can adjust the stereo width. It's not as good as the stereo imaging. I don't think is quite as good as something like ORTF or something like that, but it's great. But then we also have the Sanken CO 100K, which needs no introduction. We've been listening to some of that before, all housed in one setup, which is great. We love this one, and yeah, it's a great one.
As I mentioned earlier, this is my personal rig, my favorite setup. It's also MS. I love recording in MS. It's extremely versatile. For me, Sheps mics just kind of sound like the thing. They don't have as much hype or extended frequency response, but when you need the thing, for me, there's little other that I would reach for. And this is kind of honestly the sound of Naughty Dog games. We recorded almost everything with these, at least one of our perspectives. But the mics that are in our offices, most of the designers there, they have this or they borrowed this. So it's just one of our favorites. It's great on effects, good in ambience. One drawback, not so great in moist environments. They don't do well with humidity, so don't go to the jungle. You're not going to like the results. But generally, it's a great microphone. And they actually do, these amplifier bodies are modular. You can get an extended frequency response up to 40K, which is pretty nice. But this is just the old default and honestly my old standby, and I love it.
This is Albert, who's named after the windshield, the Cinema windshield. It's just got a load of 8040s in it, which absolutely great microphones, are sort of workhorse. This isn't an LCR setup, which is also great, a nice wide image, but we can use a nice focused center if we need it. The 8040s are absolutely brilliant. Again, you can change the pickup patterns. There's all sorts of stuff. These are cardioid. Their extended frequency goes to about 50K, but they do get a bit noisy. which is one to think about. And there's no figure of 8, sadly, for some reason. We have them in all sorts of setups like an XY and ORTF and stuff, which they're just great. I couldn't talk about mics without contact mics. We love them. Obviously, it's a completely different sound. You're not picking up any acoustics of the room or anything like that. You're just picking up the vibrations. The two that we've got there, it's the Barkus Berry 4000, and then a new setup, which is a Trance custom stereo one. But the main thing with these, you can see they've all got preamps. And that's the thing to think about with contact mics, that you need the same, a good amount of impedance to get a good sound. So these have matched preamps, which means their frequency response is nice and wide, and they sound really rich and really good. And they work, you can use them as in a combination with other microphones, which is great. And then the labs, obviously, we heard a DPA 4060 2 in that example with the guns. They go up to like 154 dB, so you can strap it onto an assault rifle and it'll handle it, which is pretty crazy. They're great for putting in hard-to-reach places like in the car, bonnets. I've put them in turbos in cars and stuff like that, and they're great. And again, the LOMs, which Rob mentioned, absolutely really affordable if you can get them. They fly off the shelves, but they're way more sensitive than the 40. I wouldn't strap one to an assault rifle. Hydrophones a little bit, another experimental sort of one. We used a lot of these on Mutate Organic. The 3 you see there, that's the Ambient ASF1, which is the more expensive. It's got a preamp built into it, so the frequency response is nice and wide. There's an ASF2, which is the same company, but slightly cheaper. And then the more affordable option at the end is the Aquarian H1, which is quite limited with its frequency response, but again, very affordable, which is cool. And lastly, parabolic dishes. This is something we use for animals quite a lot as well, and it's a way of turning an Omni microphone into something that's way more focused, like almost like a shotgun mic. So you can put like a Sanken 100K into that, and all of a sudden it's not an Omni mic. It's like a shotgun mic, which is amazing. Here's an example of a howler monkey recorded with 100K. It's about 15-20 meters away, the recording. So it sounds like you're right next to it. If you'd done that without the parabolic dish, that's a Tilinga, the one that we've got, it would just sound like reverb, sadly. But it's a great example, I think. And that is roughly it. To summarize, we just want to remind you, it's really more about gear. We talked about gear because it's fun to talk gear, but really it's all the prep. It's identifying those things in your game that are awesome opportunities for recording, and recording as much as you possibly can. Microphones, again, small part of the process. Really, the content that you get is king. You really got to get creative with your sound design. Check out all those different ways of activating your props, different ways of capturing it, different distances, different techniques, and remember to have fun. Yeah. Make some happy accidents, as Bob Ross would say. Yeah, and keep chasing the source train. That's what it's all about. Thank you. Is it quick? Yeah. Okay. So I guess we've got time for questions. A little bit, maybe? Yeah. Good. Anyone? I think there's a mic going around. Hello. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Thanks for that talk. That was really, really good. I was interested in what you were saying about the shot list and specifically how you balance that against this kind of push for experimentation. I'm assuming that you like spend a lot of time kind of just with no mics around, just experimenting with source and seeing what sounds you can get, what might be appropriate, what would be cool to capture before putting together like a shot list, and how often do you find yourself veering from the shot list during a session because you found something like a happy accident? Yeah, it's hard to stick to. I veer from it all the time, But I guess it's a way of keeping you on track. It's like, this is what we went to record. There's still time, as long as you have time to experiment in the session, that's totally fine. And it's okay to veer on. It's just a way of keeping you a bit more focused, because I'm very guilty of just like, oh, this sounds cool. And I'm just like jumping around like a crazy person. But it's a good way to keep you going. So I wouldn't say it can stop you from experimenting. And it's better on the larger sessions where you've got lots of microphones and lots of perspectives and stuff like that. It's a way of just keeping you focused.
Yeah, I would also add that like you can go to record with intention of experimentation, and then if you find a technique you really like, then you can create your shot list and be on track to like do those things that you've found. That can be a really great way of sort of just focusing in. Maybe have an experimentation day and then a targeted recording day where we're getting 12 variations of this.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else? There's a hand over here.
Hey, thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. So like you were mentioning about having a portable recorder on you, I've always got one in my pocket and I'm always grabbing stuff, but I struggle to get around to actually getting to clean up and process all of it. So do you have any tips for getting through that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's the eternal struggle. That's the worst part, right? You record a ton and then someone's got to edit it and hopefully metadata it and put it in your library, but that's more a discipline thing. When I record, so as soon as I get home, I'm going to dump this and do the editing. I find that's the best way to do it is when it's fresh in your mind, especially if you've captured something interesting, you want to use it right away. And while you're editing that out, you might as well just do the rest. But it's always a challenge, 100%. But a lot of those guerrilla recordings that are done under pressure, like in your office, you're literally like editing what you need and throwing it in. And then at the end of the project, when you're doing your archiving things, that's when the editing happens. So it may not happen for a year or change. But.
Yeah. We have a big scratch folder, essentially, which all the stuff just goes in. Sometimes it's living there for a while before it gets actually cleaned up and edited, but that's a good way of doing it for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. And breaking it down into takes. You don't want hour-long files.
I would also say
we have that all the time.
Super important. I always forget this, but voice slate your stuff so you remember what you're recording.
Yeah. Totally.
So often it's like, oh, it's a cool sound, and then you record it, and then you forget what it was by the time you go to edit it.
I'll keep it short. I was going to ask the same question as the previous person, but I will just add to your answer then that maybe joining the field recording Slack channel is worth doing because then you have a deadline. And I find that the only way to get this stuff done is somebody else forcing me to do it. So,
as Anton said, yes, join field recording Slack. It's a brilliant place, wonderful people, tons of great advice, and project deadlines.
Oh yeah. And the other thing I think is to be very free with calling people up that have an interesting company to go and record there, because you find that a lot of people are like, oh, you're interested in windmills? Well, come over and record and you get a free venue. So it's a good way for cheap recording sessions.
Good advice.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about, you say you scratch a lot of stuff. How much percentage would you say you scratch away? And how much would you keep, like, because you mentioned like it's a memory that is like emotionally ingrained in your brain. So like, how much of that you scratch but not put away? Whereas, so like, I don't know, years later, you can have recordings of a pet who has passed away or something. Like, what's the general percentage of things you scratch but keep and things you keep?
We just sort of keep everything.
That's the same answer. Keep everything.
Yeah, it just grows and grows and grows.
If there are hero takes, those might be like a separate file that's like the hero takes, but then the scratch is just another file in SoundMiner. So right underneath.
Yeah. We try to keep everything, essentially. It's good. You can sort of edit out all the best takes together into one file, but just keep the raw stuff somewhere on the drive somewhere else so you've always got it should you need to as well. That's our sort of rule, for sure. Don't delete anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got kind of a boring, tricky legal question. Because you mentioned let's build, build your library. You say your, it's my, I like to have my sounds, but what about the ownership of the sounds if you're employed in-house? Because I was told, for example, when I was at Ubisoft, as soon as you put the sound in the game, they're not yours. You shouldn't reuse them, which is tricky. I'm not sure it's the same in cinema.
Yeah.
So for me, if you're recording on the budget of your studio, that's their sounds, right? But me recording in the bathroom in my room, that's mine. Even if I do use it on the project, like the raw recordings are mine. I did those on my own time. It wasn't paid for or supervised by my company. So just be smart about it, really. You know, if your company or the project or a client is paying you to do the job, that it's theirs most often. I mean, obviously pay attention to your contract language. You may be able to work contracts where you retain ownership, but that's consult a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, not legal advice.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It depends on who you're working for and what your contract is, really. Take a look at that in a bit more detail. Yeah.
But I will say too, one more thing to that point. When you're building a library, even if you're at a studio, so all the things we recorded at Naughty Dog, like I was there for 11 years. And so building that internal library, pretty awesome. Did I get to take it with me? No, but while I was there, it was an incredible resource. And it was incredible for people who came in to immediately have access to that stuff. So it's not always a bad thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Adele, sorry.
I think that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid.
All right.
Okay.
Cheers.
Find us in the pub.
Thanks. Thank you.